A little background before I get into it. I am a 29-year-old construction worker. Been doing it since high school. Metal framing and sheetrock mostly. I'm in decent shape. No history of mental disorders in my family. Only problem I have developed over the years is a mild case of tinnitus, from being stubborn and refusing to wear ear protection. It comes during times of silence, like when I'm trying to sleep, so I try to keep the TV or a fan on to cancel out the ringing. Work was getting very slow where I lived, so I decided to move to Virginia. I was staying with a friend who got me a sweet gig with a local construction company on Norfolk Naval Base. Huge job. 5-story building. Complete build-out from the ground up. Good pay. Not exactly close to where we were staying, but the drive wasn't bad as long as I made it out before morning traffic. Only thing wrong with the job was the foreman was a complete asshole. Always talking down to us workers in that sort of passive-aggressive tone that made me want to punch him in his face. But as long as we stayed busy, he didn't bother us for long. It was a huge job, and he had a lot of people to bug. About 4 months into it, I injured my right hand, sliced my middle finger on a piece of metal. It didn't hurt at all. The doctor stitching me up said it was because I cut so deep, it severed the nerves. The next day, I had to file an injury report and everything. My boss said he was going to put me on light duty, and that I didn't have to do anything except sweep until my hand healed. I was all for it. Same pay for easy work. For the first week, things were all right. But then it started getting boring. I mean, really boring. The days dragged on, and I wondered why they didn't just pay me to stay home. So, naturally, I started wandering the job to kill time, checking out all the hallways, and there were plenty of hallways. Really long and gloomy looking when they were just gray brick all around. Some at the very top didn't even have temporary lighting, and would have been pitch black if it weren't for the huge window cutouts on each end letting in sunlight. I stayed away from those hallways. They creeped me out. One day, I was feeling bored, so I decided to go walking around the 4th floor. Most of the work had been finished, and there weren't any other trades doing work there at the time, so I had it all to myself. It was around that time I noticed my tinnitus was acting up worse than usual. I figured someone must have had a generator running or something, so I started moving towards the other end of the hallway. About 3/4 of the way, my ears start painfully ringing. I tried sticking my fingers in my ears and humming, which usually does the trick, but the ringing was so intense. I started feeling nauseous, and I fell over on my hands and knees. I was slapping my ears, trying to make the ringing stop. My eyes started watering at one point because I was slapping my head so hard. I got up on my knees, still covering my ears, trying to get to my feet so I could make it to the stairwell, but the ringing was so intense. Every move I made sent my head spinning. Moving slow helped, but not much. As I turned around, I noticed someone standing at the other end of the hallway, near one of the window cutouts. The sun behind him was so bright, all I could see was a silhouette. I started yelling, "Help! Help!" as loud as I could, but the guy didn't move. I thought maybe he had earplugs in and couldn't hear me, so I started moving towards him, slowly, so my head wouldn't spin. As I got closer, I started noticing things I hadn't before. First, this guy was huge. Like, impossibly huge. His head was small in proportion to his body, and near the top of the window. His shoulders were really wide and high, almost like he was shrugging. His arms were long, hanging down past his waist, with really long fingers on each hand. I still couldn't make out any facial features because of the bright sun behind him, but as I started realizing this person wasn't normal, I slowly backed away. He just stood there, looking right at me. I was almost to the stairs when this thing slowly cocks its head to the side, like a dog does when it's confused, and the ringing in my ears just goes crazy. It was extremely painful. At the time, I thought my ears were bleeding. I was pressing my hands into my ears and yelling, but it was so loud I couldn't even hear myself yell. I dropped back on my hands and knees and threw up on the floor until I was puking air. I looked up to see if this thing was coming at me, but I caught a last glimpse of it as it walked into a nearby room. The instant it disappeared around the corner, the ringing in my ears just stopped, like someone hit the mute button. Needless to say, I ran the hell out of there and didn't look back. I stayed away from the 4th floor for the next couple months. I told a few people what I saw, but they only pretended to be interested. It was about 5 months after it happened when I decided to go back up there. I checked every room. If there were any signs of this thing, they were long gone. I went to the window where it was standing and took a measurement. The top of the window was 10 foot 9 inches. I still have tinnitus. There have been a few times when I'm laying in bed at night and the ringing gets painful, and I freak out and check every room in my apartment. But it never gets as bad as it was that day. I really hope it never does. His eyes opened to the sound of Alice's bedroom door squealing open. Sleep tugged at him, but his parental sense demanded that he get her back into bed. He heard her bare feet slap on the naked floorboards as he rolled out of the warm envelopment of his blankets. He clumsily put on his slippers and stumbled out into the living room. At the apartment, she had always slept fine, even when she had been a baby. It was only since the move to this house that she had started acting strangely in the night. Getting up, wandering the house, talking to her friend. The kid seemed a bit old to invent an imaginary friend, but it was an improvement. The first few nights in the house, Alice had woken the whole neighborhood screaming. From the kitchen wafted the sound of soft weeping. He followed and was greeted by an unexpected sight. His tiny daughter, dressed in her nightgown, standing in front of the open basement door. She just stood there, looking down into the basement, quietly sobbing. He thought it strange she had not put on the light, and even stranger that she would stand in front of the scariest place in the house, alone. in the dark. He approached her, put his hand on her shoulder, and gently suggested, "Let's go back to bed, honey." Without looking or acknowledging him, she slowly lifted her arm and pointed down into the basement. Had she thought she had heard something? Was that why she was up? He let his eyes follow her finger into the blackness. Softly, comfortingly, he said, "There's nothing down there, honey. Let's go back to bed." Without even looking at him, she just continued to sob and point. Something felt wrong, but he had to put a stop to this behavior. She needed to feel safe in her new home, and to put away all these childish fears. Explanations hadn't worked. Now he had to show her. He stepped down onto the first creaking wooden step, leaned forward, and flipped the light switch. The illumination shocked his eyes, but fortified his resolve as he heavily strode down to the very bottom of the stairs. With confidence in his voice, he looked about and proclaimed, "Nothing down here, honey. I don't know what you heard, but..." Silently and abruptly, the light went out. Terror struck. He looked back up the stairs. There, his daughter stood in silhouette, no longer pointing, but standing motionless. Eyes wide, he watched the door, as though swung by a powerful unseen hand, swing shut, leaving him in the most utter of darkness. He bounded up the stairs, once, twice, stopped and reached forward for the knob to escape. He reached, but his hand found nothing. He swung wildly for the switch, but found only smooth, bare wall. Gingerly, he stepped forward and continued to reach. Surely the door must be close enough to feel by now. Slowly, he took another step, his hands blindly groping into the nothingness ahead, and his feet constantly misjudging the next step. One more step, 2 more, 3, 4. He climbed, and his speed and panic increased. It had already been at least several floors worth of stairs. How was this possible? Maybe he should try to go back down. It would be easier. Remembering that the basement stairs ran under his own bedroom, he cried for his wife. "Vanessa!" His voice seemed unusually loud, as if in a confined space, and echoed back towards him from below. The echo pushed him beyond attempting to rationalize this insanity, and settled any contemplation about going down. No, going down into inky, echoing nothingness seemed like a very bad idea. Better to go up into inky, silent nothingness. Cautiously, sightlessly, he resumed his climb, feeling ahead into nothing with his outstretched hands. So many stairs, and his legs ached. He turned and sat on the step. Alone, he felt a solitude more complete than he had ever known. Darkness, desperation, and despondency mixed in his soul as tears began to flow. What was that? He sat bolt upright and held his breath. Was that a sound? He strained his ears but only perceived the pounding of his own veins. Then, distantly, Slightly, maybe, like a scrape or a whisper, or just a shifting of air. Sound seemed to echo up from below. Adrenaline poured into his veins and overrode his fatigue. He rose and heedlessly dashed up the stairs. Several times he tripped and battered himself on the steps, but still he rose and charged on. Yes, he was sure now. At first barely audible, but rising steadily, a roaring, whirling white noise. It seemed to be all around him, engulfing him, drowning out all other sounds and scents. Blindly, his senses overwhelmed, he frantically sprinted up until... falling. Impact. Pain. Rolling. Hurting. Breaking. It was late the next morning when Vanessa finally awoke. She wrapped herself in her terry cloth bathrobe and made her way towards the kitchen. As she passed Alice's room, her maternal instinct led her to open the door a crack and check in. Her mind was not awake enough to realize the incongruity of the child's room. Dark, with all the shades drawn, and the closet door, in front of which Alice sat, wide open. "Morning, honey." No response. "What are you doing? Do you know where Daddy is?" With an uncharacteristically serious expression, Alice slowly turned her head and responded in her tiny voice, "Talking to my friend." Vanessa withdrew to the kitchen to make her coffee. It took an hour or so for her to finally open the door and find his battered and beaten body at the bottom of the basement stairs. Later, the coroner would speculate that he had run flat into the closed door at the top of the stairs, had fallen back, and broken his neck, and several other bones as he tumbled down. The only really odd thing was that he was so bruised and battered from such a short fall down. So few stairs.